Being middle class in 2026 kinda sucks. And the middle class is shrinking faster now than we've ever seen in our entire lifetimes. So let's take a look at what's going on and, more importantly, talk about what you can do to stay ahead.
My parents are retired public school teachers. They're like younger boomers and have been teachers their whole lives. I want you to think about what life looks like for a household of two public school teachers with two kids today. Like, what does their house look like? What's their finances look like? Because this was my parents' situation. As two public school teachers, this is where I grew up, on a lake with a boat in a 3-bedroom house. Not like a super fancy house, but a 3-bedroom house. There are currently 2 houses for sale on this lake. One is $530,000 and the other is $1.2 million. On the lake my parents moved onto in the 90s as 2 public school teachers with 2 children. They never had side hustles, they never had summer jobs, they had summers off. They were 2 public school teachers, and this is what that afforded them.
Guys, this is actually a perfect time to announce I just bought my first home. This is it, and it only cost me $500,000. Currently, the average home costs 7 years of income for the average household. So if you don't own a car, if you don't eat, if you don't drink, if you never spend a dime, you could pay off your home in 7 years. A home is considered affordable if it costs roughly 3 years of income. So if you want to build wealth, rent and invest, rent and invest, rent and invest, rent and invest. Say it with me, rent and invest, rent and invest. It genuinely does not make sense to buy a home right now unless you're planning on living in it forever and you can comfortably afford it off a $300K salary.
The federal poverty line for a family of 4 is $32,150. For an individual, it's $15,650. If that sounds crazy to you, that's because it is. I know people who are paying more than $32,000 a year just for childcare. A Wall Street portfolio manager recently went viral for saying that the new poverty line for a family of 4 should actually be $140,000. He's gotten a lot of pushback for saying that, but $32,000 is definitely way too low. Here's how he broke down the basic needs budget for a family of 4 where both parents have jobs and there are 2 children. $32,000 for childcare, $23,000 for housing, $15,000 for food, $15,000 for transportation, $11,000 for healthcare, and $22,000 for other essential things. The median household income in 2024 was $83,730, but a lot of families making $80,000 feel like they're barely scraping by. What amount of money would let you live comfortably?
$32K a year, yeah, those kids are dead. This is what I'd like to call a you statistic because the average annual cost of raising a child has climbed to over $21,000 a year per child. So if you've got 2 of them, you'd be negative 11 grand every year. This exact reason is why fertility rates are at all-time lows, because you're destined to live paycheck to paycheck with kids on a middle class income, and less people are willing to sign up for that. Plus, I just feel like an awful dad if I'm feeding my kids instant ramen 3 meals a day. So if you plan on having kids, just make sure you create a budget first. You've got literally 9 months to do it anyway, so you might as well.
There are 2 groups of people right now in America that are struggling. Group number 1 is the unemployment, the minimum wage, and people living in poverty. That has been a problem for so many decades and needs to be addressed. The new bucket of individuals, this has started ever since the pandemic, started a little earlier, but it sped up during the pandemic. This is the bucket of what used to be the middle class. This is the group of people who are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, working 2 jobs and a side hustle, barely getting by. These are people who have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, trades, skills, work their way up in a company. So when we hear the boomers saying that you need to work harder, you're entitled and lazy, that is why that second group of people are getting so offended, because they're doing everything that they can. And they're not working a second job so they can save up for a house or go on vacation or buy their children stuff. They are working a second job just to keep the lights on, just to have a few extra $100 in an emergency fund. So that second group of people are now speaking up, and both groups need help. And that's why we need to come together and address the cost of living and cost of housing. Because if we let this go another 5 to 7 years, we're going to see a huge gap in wealth.
Oh no, guys, did you Guys, we're about to see a huge gap in wealth. Guys, be ready. Huge gap of wealth is coming. We're currently living in something called a K-shaped economy. Over the past 4 years, the stock market has been just a rocket ship and home prices are at all-time highs. So if you own either of them, then you're kind of set. But the people who don't own assets are screwed because their wages aren't keeping up with inflation and they have no assets to appreciate. And it's especially true for the ultra rich. This is a graph of the share of net worth held by the top 1%. Back in the day, they held about 22% of the total wealth. Now it's 31%. So I don't know about this huge wealth gap that's about to happen because it's here.
Zooming into my 2019 picks to compare current prices. Variety box of chips, $9.98, $31 now. Ranch for $19, $8.75 now. Mountain Dew $2.19, $3.58 now. Italian dressing $1.98, $2.67 now. Pasta sauce $6.24, over $8 now. Frozen steak dinner $3 for $49 now.
What the hell are they putting in chips? $20 more after 7 years? And I knew ranch was getting super expensive, but I wasn't expecting it to have doubled. The takeaway here is that if you're considering investing into the stock market, do not. Just invest into ranch. It's videos like these that make me doubt government data because they say that inflation's only going up 4% a year, 8% a year, but you now have to take out a personal loan to make a Caesar salad. You can actually save on average 1/3 or more at the grocery store by choosing store brands over name brands. And if you consider how much the average household spends on groceries, that's over $2,000 in savings a year. Or shop at Costco or Sam's Clubs because it's cheaper than Walmart.
So today on Good Morning America, we had a first look at some new data that shows record high credit card debt and more Americans falling behind on their credit card payments. So this is an analysis from two groups, the Century Foundation and Protect Borrowers. And what it shows is that 111 million Americans, so that's about 40% of all US adults, are carrying a balance every month on their credit card. So they are not paying off those bills in full. Of that, more than 27 million Americans can only afford to make minimum payments every month. And what is also sobering is that a growing share of families are maxing out their credit cards, opening new accounts, or then turning to other high cost, potentially high cost options like payday loans or buy now, pay later. This report really shows how much interest can get people into a debt spiral. Credit card interest rates are around 20% on average right now. So if you are only making minimum payments, you can get dinged with very hefty interest charges.
The worst, and I mean the worst type of debt you can get yourself into is credit card debt, and it feels like that's just the norm now. The average American is carrying $6.5K on their credit card right now, so if they only made the minimum payments, then they'd pay 10 grand in interest. And half of Americans are carrying credit card balances to cover essential expenses. So if you're in the situation or you want to avoid the situation, save up $1,000 first. Even if you are paying off credit card debt right now with no savings, if an unexpected expense comes up, what are you going to do? You're going to use your credit card. And then you're back to square one. The average person is only saving 3% of their income right now. So if you can even save 4%, then you're already ahead. And if you are in debt, you're not alone because 1/3 of households' income is falling behind their expenses and half is barely keeping up.
100 grand a year is the fastest way to get broke. If you make 100 grand a year, you've been lied to. You were raised thinking, oh, I'm a 6-figure earner. If I can get to 100 grand a year, life is gonna be amazing. When you make 100 grand a year, you're the poorest of the middle class people. You think life is gonna be so much better and then you realize, oh, it's really just not that much more. So at 100 grand, you tend to get into debt you can't afford. You end up screwing up your cash flow. At 100 grand a year, you have to pretend you're still making 50.
I love this video so much, not because it's technically accurate, but because it's emotionally correct. Lifestyle inflation, when you hit a certain salary level and you think that because you make a certain number, you gotta upgrade the car, you gotta upgrade the apartment, your clothes, or you eat, and then you spend all the money you make and end up where you started, which is broke. I don't think you should live like you make 50K if you make 100K. That's kind of stupid. Yeah, I think he pulled that number out of his butt, but a 20% savings rate is absolutely awesome. So if you can live off 80% of your income after taxes, depending on where you live, and just invest and then save the rest, that's where the real wealth is going to be built. And you can build it without torturing yourself like this guy. Don't listen to this guy.
I feel like nobody wants to admit it, or just not enough people are talking about it, but the middle class in Pennsylvania is basically disappearing. Growing up in Eastern PA, the middle class was the goal. You get a decent job, you buy the house, you go on vacation every once in a while, and you live a comfortable life. Now, in 2026, you're barely making enough to survive, or you're making so much that inflation doesn't even affect you. There doesn't really seem to be any in between anymore. The people that by definition are supposed to be middle class are driving for Uber after work every week, or they're picking up side hustles on the weekend, or they're stressing over grocery prices every single week. That's the part that's the most frustrating to me, is that we normalize needing multiple different sources of income just to maintain what used to be a normal lifestyle. In places like Pittsburgh, Philly, Reading, whatever, that used to be affordable to live in are not super affordable anymore, and that's just the truth. So if people are starting to need more than just a full-time income to survive, kind of means that there's no middle class anymore.
This is kind of true, kind of not true. 9 million Americans reported working multiple jobs, which is the highest number ever reported, but that's still a fraction of the population. At the same time, there should not be millions of Americans working multiple jobs to support themselves. The richest people I know outside of the doctors and the lawyers are usually business owners or entrepreneurs. And personally, I'd rather work for myself than for 3 different employers, so you might as well start that side hustle and just see where it takes you.
Middle-class brands are dying. Let's talk about the death of the middle. For the better part of the last century, Western countries lived in a consumer society that, despite its veneration of excess, was actually largely driven by the middle class and middle income spending. But worsening economic inequality is changing the middle from the broadest and safest territory for brands to occupy to the most dangerous. We are already in a K-shaped economy that is hollowing out the middle class. Spending is increasingly concentrated in the top 10% of society. So the middle class consumer is literally disappearing. And as we move to a more stratified society, brands are increasingly going to be confronted with a choice. Do you push up into exclusive luxury messaging, or do you move down to incorporate some explicit price or value narrative? In either case, this is bad for all brands because it was the middle that held by far the richest and most diverse brand narrative.
This video is so interesting to me because you see it everywhere you go. More specifically with food, because casual or middle class dining is struggling so badly right now, like Denny's, TGI Fridays, Buca di Beppo, all of these restaurants are shutting down over hundreds of locations. Dining out is so expensive anyways, so people are choosing to save money and go for a cheaper non-sit-down places. And if they do want to dine out, they think, well, I'm spending a ton of money anyways, so I might as well just enjoy it. So then they'll go to a nicer place. And if you've ever been to one of these middle-class restaurants lately, outside of maybe Chili's, you'll see that most of the people eating there are older or elderly. Because these people have dined at these restaurants for so long when it was affordable back in the day, and I guess they still have the money to do it, so that's why you see them so much. If you ate a Chili's 3 for me for dinner, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you, my friends, for watching, and I will see you next time.